This episode of Primitive Culture is brought to you by Audible.com, offering more than 180,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. To get a free audiobook of your choice and help Trek FM at the same time, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space, an international program of the non-profit National Space Society. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter by visiting enterpriseinspace.org.
This is Tim Russ, Lieutenant Commander Tuvok on Star Trek Voyager, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Open your mind to the past. All this may mean something.
It's a primitive culture. I'm just trying to blend in.
Some people think the future means the end of history. Well, we haven't run out of history quite yet.
Hello and welcome to Primitive Culture, a Trek FM podcast all about our history, our culture and how Star Trek relates to it. I'm Duncan Barrett and today I'm joined by two very special guests. First of all, we have Tony Robinson from Continuing Mission.
Yes, hi. Great to be here. Thanks, Duncan. How are you?
I'm very good, Tony. And also here we have Lee Hutchison, formerly of Earl Grey.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. And we're meeting in a very prestigious location. We're meeting in the bar of the Grosvenor Hotel in London, Victoria, which means we've actually somehow managed to realise that classic joke, an Englishman, an Irishman and a Scotsman walk into a bar. And what do you get? The punchline is a Trek FM podcast, it seems. So great to see you both and great to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a nice plug for this hotel as well, so hopefully we'll get a next round of drinks for free when this happens.
That would be nice. Yeah, we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, we'll cue them in.
Yeah, but the reason we're here actually it's appropriate really. We're going to have a little chat about the ways that Star Trek in its 50-odd year history has represented our Isles, over for the United States, for the American audience primarily. But right from the beginning, we've had Scottish characters, we've had Scotty, of course. We've had Irish characters like Miles O'Brien. We've had plenty of English characters as well, and we've also had some specific episodes which really try to kind of tap into that kind of that kind of culture or these kind of cultures and try to represent those in the 23rd or the 24th century. And I thought maybe we could start off talking about some of these episodes where there's this attempt to recreate Scottish or an Irish environment, which I have to say are not, these are not typically fan favourite episodes. I'll be interested to hear what you two have to say about them. But why don't we start with Sub Rosa, first of all. So this is the next generation. This is the Scottish planet, basically. Lee, I'll hand over to you.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this classic?
I recently revisited it and it kind of seemed very much like 50 Shades Star Trek. I mean, maybe I'm the only one that draws the parallel between this, but obviously Next Generation was predominantly mostly in the 90s. And I think almost this episode seems like an interesting companion to Seinfeld. It seems like an odd connection, but I've been watching a lot of Seinfeld recently, and Seinfeld's all about these liberated female characters that just have promiscuous relationships. And we rarely ever kind of see that in kind of Star Trek women talking about romance, sexuality. And in this episode we have our two female characters that do talk about that, talk about their relationships, their dreams, their passions, and it borders on quite hot and steamy stuff, probably what they're talking about. So I find that kind of interesting. It seems like an anomaly in Star Trek that you have women talking in such ways. But it is a terrible episode. I think it's got the problem that Star Trek has with a lot of alien races, where they distill an entire planet, and in this case a nation, down to its bare bones of this is Scottish ghosts and passionate Scottish lovers. That's a fine stereotype in my view, and it just seems to be like, this is Scotland. They have kilts, and they have, I don't think they've got kilts actually, but they've got the bagpipes, they've got this Scottish culture and tradition, and it seems very much like a Scottish tradition that is only represented in tourist shops to sell kilts and tat, and it bears no resemblance to any Scotland that I know or any Scots that I know at all. So it's a pretty awful episode in that respect. The Scottish accents are okay, but the idea that there's this planet which basically perpetrates Scottish stereotypes just seems very fitting in with Klingons are all warriors and Romulans are all duplicitous, so they seem to have approached the Scottish culture in the same way.
It's interesting that there's a discussion early on in the episode where the guy who is an alien, and Captain Picard says to him, you're obviously not from Scotland yourself, and he talks about how he went to Scotland as a boy, and it meant something to him, and he felt like this should be his home. So he went to this kind of basically Scottish Disneyland planet, and there's this kind of interesting conversation where he's saying, it was so important to us that we weren't just we weren't making a facsimile, we were making something authentic, we were making something real. And then you watch the episode and you're like, well, maybe you shouldn't have emphasised that point. And you get that again with Fairhaven in Voyager. They sort of go to great lengths to say how authentic it is, and you're sitting there watching it thinking, well, you're not going to convince people just by saying it. It feels totally plastic. It feels totally kind of inauthentic. And I think, yes, maybe the accents, I suppose, are all right, but the guy who is the sort of proper Scots character, who is the one who gets killed by the ghost, because the ghost doesn't have a Scottish accent, weirdly. No. He has an English accent, which is kind of strange given that he's meant to be the Scottish ghost, but he is like an absolute kind of stereotype of a sort of mad Scottish character, isn't he, that man?
Well, I think it's one of these ones that does this English ghost that's killed off represent how the Scottish people feel about the English government, or for example. So we could really dive deep into that sort of tangent.
Yeah, I'll be on the back end of that too.
yeah. But he's a real sort of groundskeeper Willie type character, that guy. I mean, he makes James Doohan's presentation of Scottishness seem like totally realistic and naturalistic and kind of, subtle, really.
Yeah, it's just so bizarre that, as you say, it's this Disneyland version of Scotland that bears no resemblance to a Scotland that I know, one that's rich in culture, it's diverse, whereas here it's just like, no, not at all. And it just becomes quite humorous. And I think, like you watch it and it's one of these episodes that's so bad it's quite good to watch. Like I'll watch and I think, this is enjoyable enough to watch. But, if it's being put out there into Scottish TVs, you'd be looking at it going, God, this is really borderline offensive or embarrassing. And I mean, I've seen worse representations of Scotland on screen, so it's not the worst in that respect, but not the greatest.
Right.
It's sort of curious. Is it a bad episode? Is it Scottishness part of what makes it bad, or would it? I mean, my feeling is it would probably be a terrible episode anyway. It's like the script is awful, the acting. I mean, and it's not their fault really, but like necessarily the acting is not that great. It's kind of, it feels like there's not really much about that episode that saves it, apart from, as you say, the one thing that I do quite like about it is those conversations between Deanna and Beverly, which are quite explicit, really, where she's talking about this dream she had and how she'd never been touched like that before and so on. It's kind of, definitely that's Brannon Braga pushing some kind of sexual boundary there. But at the same time, the whole sort of storyline around it is just so ridiculous.
It's this idea that Beverly crushes, she gets her one episode a season, but if that, and this is her episode that she falls in love with a ghost. She leaves the Enterprise for a ghost, and Picard's almost just eye rolling every time. Well, I'm leaving. No, you're not. I'm not accepting this. And then, he goes off with this ghost from a candle. And it's just like, I'd love to, like, I know it was a difficult final season. They're preparing for Generations. They're wrapping up. Deep Space Nine is on the go. But just the idea that they went, let's go with this episode. This is our final season. We need to get a crusher episode on the board. What we're going to go with? Scottish planet with a ghost? Go for it.
Sexy candle.
Exactly.
Grief,
It was, it was definitely a strange one.
They obviously don't remember having any conversations with Tasha Yar and fully functional data.
Oh, yes.
They obviously ruled that one out anyway.
Well, it kind of seems to come out of nowhere for Crusher, because this idea of this kind of Scottish ancestry, I don't think that's something that's ever been mentioned before.
Again.
I mean, or ever mentioned again. It's kind of... I mean, we do know, I think, that her parents have died and that her grandmother brought her up, maybe. I think that's mentioned early on in Next Gen. But certainly this whole kind of Scottish heritage
It's probably the tenuous link is the red hair. That's it. She's got red hair. Where must she be from? Scotland.
Yeah. Which is interesting. We see again, just sort of jumping over to Voyager, when we think about Fairhaven, you kind of get some of the same thing with Captain Janeway. And Captain Janeway, we're always finding out things about her past and her ancestors and so on. And here we find out she had this aunt who lived in Ireland. She has these kind of Irish connections. And interestingly, I wonder whether that comes largely from Kate Mulgrew, because Kate Mulgrew's family were an Irish-American Catholic family. And she is very invested in Ireland. If you read her autobiography, which I'd recommend, it's a really interesting, well-written book, she talks a lot about working in Ireland, about holidays she took to Ireland. She actually met her second husband, who she was with for many years, and kind of courting, I think, throughout the run of Voyager in Ireland. And so certainly for her, Ireland seems to mean something to her. I got a quote from her. This was with an Irish publication. She said, "I'm 3 or 4 generations removed, but I feel quite Irish. When I go there, I'm immediately transported back." I don't know, Tony, whether you feel... I mean, obviously, I know in America there is this kind of sense, these sort of hyphenated identities. You know, you get these Irish Americans or Scottish Americans, I suppose, or whatever. I always find it kind of strange to think how much of a connection can someone have to a country that they haven't been brought up in, that in many cases they haven't... You know, she had visited Ireland, fine, but I mean, in a lot of cases they haven't. But obviously, I think for the American audience and for the American writers and so on, that's something that is seen as very meaningful.
Earlier in my career, I worked for the Irish airline Aer Lingus and got many opportunities through that to travel to the States. And whenever I was on a transatlantic crossing, somebody would remind me that there's a great Irish heritage and love for Ireland in America. And in fact, one of the sentences that commonly came across was, there are more Irish people living in America than live in Ireland. You know, and these would be first, second, third generation Irish descendants. And some Americans would claim to be more Irish than the Irish themselves. So there's definitely, the Irish have played a huge, or created a huge impact on American culture, or added to it in a great degree. And that would come across through various movies, actors. If people are not familiar with the Abbey Theatre in Dublin, which is one of the famous theatres in the world, during the Second World War, because of various problems that were rising out of that, a lot of actors left Ireland and went to America, and their very presence acting in various films like Maureen O'Hara and people like that, John Barrymore, they made that impact, which by extension then fed itself back into American culture, and somehow the circle has continued. They've managed to propagate and repropagate this Irishness. Somehow it's embedded in the American ideal somewhere.
But is, I guess, so my question, and I do understand, like, obviously there is a real link, probably more so than with Scotland. There's certainly a link between Ireland and America, because so many Irish people went to America, for example, during the potato famine. There were waves of immigration where getting to America was seen as a kind of escape from a very difficult life, and so a lot of people kind of made that sort of pilgrimage in a sense.
Oh sure, but they would have hit the East Coast before they hit the
absolutely.
West Coast.
I guess one of the things that I'm wondering about, though, is that, so from my perspective, and this is, my perspective as an English person, so I get that for a lot of people in America, they have this family heritage. It means something to them. Even say someone like Kate Mulgrew, it means something to them. But at the same time, when we look at the way that, say, an Irish village is presented in Star Trek, or that a Scottish planet is presented in Star Trek, it looks so unbelievably fake. It's kind of hard to reconcile that with... So I'm sure for Kate Mulgrew, with her Irish heritage, it was nice for her to play these Irish stories, but at the same time, that set, well, it must be the same set they used when it was a French village in The Killing Game, right? It looks identical. It doesn't look to me anything like the island that I visited. I'm sure, Tony, it doesn't look to you very recognisable as an Irish community in any way.
Oh, not at all. I mean, there were elements of it that typically you would have seen in a village at, around the beginning of the 1900s, which is possibly when it's set, and that would literally be dirt roads, animals in the street, and a strange-looking bicycle and a car that didn't quite work. I'm not sure, but there were elements of it that were almost authentic. The pub, but then anytime Irish people are featured in some movie or even in Star Trek, it's always going to end up in the bar somewhere. So just like we are here, strange.
Just like we are here. Well, that's true.
How can we sneer at Star Trek? It's not really a representation of Scottish and Irish people in a pub. Here we are.
But at least
I should add, I am having a cup of tea.
Lee's very good, having a cup of tea, though not a cup of Earl Grey tea.
No,
he's
been
cup of English breakfast tea.
Admonished.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, yes, that's true. But at the same time, I guess that sort of leads on to another question. So there's the kind of the authenticity or the inauthenticity of the production design, which, okay, fair enough. We know they've got standing sets. We know it's kind of the backlot. Obviously, their backlot is going to look more convincing for, an episode set in Chicago or New York or somewhere than it is for an episode set in 19th century Ireland. Okay, maybe we can give a bit of leeway. I suppose, though, it does tie into that idea, what you were saying, Lee, about this kind of tourist version of Scotland. It's all the kind of beautiful, rather twee little green signs with Irish writing on them. It's all the kind of, there's something about it. It's all very, it does feel very Disneyfied. And okay, fair enough. This is Tom Paris's version of Ireland. Who knows whether Tom Paris has ever been to Ireland? But again, there's in these episodes, there are these kind of conversations about, well, I wanted it to be authentic. I wanted it to be genuine. I didn't want to kind of mess around with things. And you sort of, I don't know. It makes me wonder, to the American audience, does that read as authentic? Do they think that's genuine somehow, or do they recognise that it's a kind of bit of a twee fantasy in a way?
Probably the Ireland or Scotland they would see in an Epcot Centre or something like that, where you go around all these different places, and it's like, now here you are in Holland, here's the clogs, and here you are now in Germany, enjoy your big hot dogs or strudel or something like that. It's just it's just not any sort of Ireland I would understand.
No, and the annoying parts of it are that it has a cartoonish feel to it. It's definitely a cliche, but the worst part of it all is that it propagates a false idea of where we come from, what we represent, how far advanced the country is technologically, architecturally, cosmopolitanly, all these things, and it always seems that it harks back to these cliches where people will say begorrad or drink a glass of whiskey and there'd be someone playing an accordion in the background or something. Now, in Fairhaven, okay, they were representing a turn of the 19th, 20th century sort of village, and so there wasn't any technology that you could identify with. So you could get away with a certain degree of license to do with that.
But at the same time, this is in the 90s. This is when Ireland was really emerging as a kind of tech country, wasn't it? It was a real economic boon, and it was all to do with technology, and kind of, it was a period where Ireland was really stepping forward, in a sense, into the future, and yet the version that we have in Star Trek, of course, is this very sort of traditional.
Ballicus Angel style.
Exactly, Ballicus Angel style. Or watching some of those episodes, it was The Vicar of Dibley was what I was thinking of, which is not set in Ireland, obviously, but that kind of approach to rural life, which is so, like you say, cartoonish, silly, kind of totally lacking in grit somehow. And it's a shame to lose that somehow, I think.
It is, yeah. There's an American writer who lives in Ireland who wrote a book called Spock's World.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I think she knows enough about what life is like in Ireland. If she had been on the staff and had said, no, you can't do that, you can't say that, you have to do it this way, that way, I think she would have kicked backsides.
Right. Yeah.
Straightened a few people out and whatever. The one thing that gets me, and possibly gets Lee as well, is that when people open their mouths to speak in an Irish or Scottish accent on these shows, there's no dialect known to man that remotely resembles where these people come from. I'd like to know what part of Ireland do these people actually come from. I'd like to go there and say, you really speak this way?
Because it's standard Irish. I can see Dublin from 50 miles away here, or something like that.
Yeah.
I can't remember how there was some sort of geometry where it was like, well, actually, this places them in Northern Ireland or something like that. There was some bizarre. I can't remember where.
Now that's interesting, because to me, as an English person, actually, that's one of the things I was sort of on the lookout for, rewatching those Fairhaven episodes, and indeed Up the Long Ladder as well. And to me, the accents actually didn't seem too bad. I mean, compared to sometimes where you hear Americans doing English accents, and they sound Australian typically. They sound very fake, because I think that's quite a difficult transition. And I think some of those actors, I mean, the guy who plays Catherine Janeway's boyfriend, Michael, he's called Finton O'Toole or something. Isn't he?
Yeah.
He's got he seems to be at least have an authentic Irish heritage. His accent seemed quite believable to me. I don't know about to you, but that's kind of interesting. That sort of gets into a whole other level of specificity and, and I don't know whether for the American characters in Star Trek, does Riker have a convincing Alaskan accent? Does Ash Tyler have a convincing Washington State accent? I have no idea. I mean, I sort of buy into all of that. I buy into, Trip Tucker's Southern accent, even though the actor is not, I don't think, from the South, is he? So in some ways, there's the specificity of accents. Then there's the idea of a kind of standard American accent. So maybe it's, I don't know, that doesn't bother me, but at the same time, the only English characters that we've seen in Star Trek all have received pronunciation accent, pretty much. You don't really get any regional English accents in Star Trek either.
I suppose you never get that sort of right in Scotland. Okay, this is someone that's got an Aberdeen accent, and I know Jason Isaac said his was an Edinburgh accent when he did put it on.
As Lorca.
I
was wondering if you were going to.
That was a pretty good accent.
I thought it was very good. I thought it was one of the best.
Yeah.
I think it was after Trek. They said it was Edinburgh based. Well, I'm from Edinburgh. Admittedly, I've lived there 12 years, and Edinburgh does have an amalgamation where it's very Englishy sounding and Scottish accent compared to Glasgow, which is more that thicker, the train spotting style one where it's really comes from the back of the throat. Kind of Aberdeen, which kind of has been associated with Scotty quite a bit, is a bit more of a thicker kind of country accent. And the same with England, we're in London and it changes, tube stop to tube stop, the accent. So you never sort of get that nuance of someone going, I'm going to really throw myself into a Brummie role or, a Northern role. So you never get that in any of the
But
shows.
it's the accent that sells it. If Michael in Fairhaven had spoken with what I would say, that's definitely a dialect from some part of Ireland, because I have to say, being from Ireland myself, I think I'm pretty familiar with different, sounds from West Coast to East Coast, from North to South. Obviously, for American audiences, it just has to be generic. I don't know, but if it was more identifiable, then for me it would sell it. It would say I would sit back and say, "Oh, that guy is definitely from Ireland." Yeah, and if it turned out he wasn't, and he was from Saskatchewan or something, then
you'd be impressed.
I'd be impressed. That's because there are a few actors who, well, I guess because their parents were Irish, they know how to mimic the sound and the feel. But you'd swear blind they were born and raised in a small town in the west of Ireland. Miles O'Brien, is it? Can we bring Miles?
Yeah,
O'Brien
absolutely.
in?
Yeah.
Because Colm Meaney, obviously, if people haven't seen anything else Colm Meaney's been in. But
then they're missing out.
They're missing out.
Definitely.
Most noticeably.
I wonder what the crossover between people that watch Star Trek and have seen Die Hard 2 is, what that diagram
I was
looks
wondering
like.
if you'd mentioned Die Hard 2, because he's the captain of,
the doomed plane.
Yeah,
Right,
Windsor 102.
Alan Partridge, the movie as well.
Yeah, and he does a Welsh accent in The Englishman, who went up a hill and came down a mountain.
right,
Have you
yeah.
seen that one? That's an interesting, bit of accent work going on there.
Slightly off topic, but the actor whose name I'm going to forget now, who's in Game of Thrones, who plays with a Geordie accent,
I've never watched Game of Thrones.
is actually from Dublin, and when you hear him speak,
Right.
it's frightening. It's like he's switching. Hang on, which accent is he portraying? The Dublin one or the Geordie one? But its Dublin accent is...
Well, I think a lot of American viewers were surprised to hear Jason Isaacs talking in his English accent.
Yes,
maybe if they hadn't seen Harry Potter and they only knew him from Discovery. I mean, again, to me, his American accent sounds great. I don't know whether to an American audience... Well, obviously it works because they were surprised by it. So,
well, a bit like Hugh Laurie when he went in, when he did his accent in House.
When I watch that, it feels completely fake.
Yeah.
That American accent. That's the weird thing. But it must be because I know Hugh Laurie doesn't sound like that.
No,
do you know what I mean?
Benedict Cumberbatch and Doctor Strange, it took me about half an hour to adjust to
that was a
Benedict
weird one.
Cumberbatch. I'm a hand surgeon.
No, just Benedict Cumberbatch in Doctor Strange took me the whole movie to adjust to the fact that he was there.
Yeah.
But Colm Meaney, genuine Dublin-born and bred actor, now appearing in Star Trek, and not faking an American accent, but he is making his Dublin accent very gentle, so it doesn't, jar on the ear, because some Dublin dialects can do that in the same way that some Glaswegian accents can do it, or people from Belfast have a real, like West Belfast, have a real thick accent too that can,
sounds harsh,
upset your eardrums. Apologies to all our Belfast and Glaswegian listeners, but...
And O'Brien, I suppose, is an interesting kind of counterpoint to Scotty, if you think of it in that way. I mean, Scotty is a bit of a cartoonish version of a Scots person. He's not, he's not played by a Scottish actor. Initially, he's played by a Canadian actor. Then, in the more recent films, he's played by an English actor, whose accent I think is more accurate.
Yeah,
right?
well,
It's
Simon
more
Pegg's
plausible,
wife is from Glasgow.
I see. Okay, so that probably helps.
Yeah, I think he said that he'd done quite a bit of research into the accent. But I almost think the difficulty is it's hard sometimes to judge his accent because he is Simon Pegg from Spaced, Hot Fuzz, Cornetto, everything like that. Yeah. And hearing his accent and then knowing that's a fake one, it's difficult to separate the two and judge it.
You're kind of aware of it.
Yeah, I'm like, that's Simon Pegg putting on a Scottish accent, and it's okay, it's fine, it's good. And I think, as a kid, growing up, James Doohan, it was a shock to find out as a kid he was Canadian. I always thought, oh, that's a Scottish accent.
So you bought it as a Scottish child? You bought his Scottish accent, really?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. That's interesting.
But
that's
with
amazing.
a name like Doohan, it must have some, background to it. He's obviously, if you're going to be the chief engineer on board the Enterprise, was it... They chose it because traditionally engineers were Scottish.
Right. He got to pick his accent, and he said that's why he wanted to do it. Was Scotland had this history of being creators, inventors. Some of the greatest pieces of technology in the world, like television that we'll all enjoy Discovery on tomorrow, came from Scots. So he felt that was a normal transition to go from
everybody will be wondering who you're referring to. So keep them guessing. Absolutely, look it up.
I don't know if we will be enjoying Discovery on television, though, will we? If it's streaming.
But then you've got
That's
to watch
a different
it on a
technology.
television.
You've got to watch it on a. You've got to watch it on a television or a laptop. Lots of people watch it on a laptop. But I take your point definitely. And also, James Doohan's accent was based on a particular man that he knew when he was serving, wasn't it? A man from Aberdeen that he worked with, and that he kind of got to know quite well. So he was obviously like storing accents because he was a bit of an accent guy. He was a bit of a voice guy. He was sort of storing these accents that he could use later on.
It's quite controversial. I say controversial in the lamest way, but there is controversy in Scotland about where he truly came from. I think some show notes said it was Linlithgow, which is stone's throw away from Edinburgh, 15 minutes on the train. And then in Aberdeen, I think it's the Wolf in the Fold, he mentioned his drinking days, much like me as a teenager. We're in Aberdeen. So there's often been this thing, where's Scotty born? There was talk that they were going to make a Scotty statue in Aberdeen. It's never happened, but it's a tight-fisted local council, I should say.
You're allowed to say that. We wouldn't get away with that.
As someone that paid taxes in that region, I for sure. Yeah. And then Linlithgow, more claim it, they actually have I've yet to see it, I have no excuse why I haven't, but they apparently have a little Scotty museum in a local area. Last year, a couple of years ago, bizarrely, they showed Wrath of Khan in a castle in Linlithgow. That's just a tribute to Scotty, and I tried so hard to get tickets for that, but they did a ballot. I missed out. I sent an email complaining, still didn't get a ticket, and then an introduction from Nicholas Meyer, and this was there to say, a tribute to Scotty and everything like that. So there is definitely a lot of people trying to claim Scotty in Scotland as one of their own.
Well, I'm going to go with Linlithgow, and based on the fact that Chris Doohan, and I've told this story on another podcast, but it's worth repeating. Chris Doohan was invited by the mayor of Linlithgow to a ceremony honouring the birthplace of Montgomery Scott, and the mayor drove him from the airport to his hotel. And during the journey, the conversation went along the lines of James Doohan's Scottish accent. And the mayor asked Christopher, Jimmy's son, would he mind doing an announcement in the accent? Chris said, I can't do a Scottish accent. And the mayor laughed and said, neither could your dad.
Well, there you go.
I think they're well aware of some of the
some of the issues.
Failings.
Yeah.
But I'll go with Linlithgow as the birthplace purely because they put more effort in than Aberdeen did.
Right.
And there is a museum, and they did show the Wrath of Khan.
Fair enough.
So catch up, Aberdeen.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Aberdeen's got a bit of work to do.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's kind of interesting. I guess maybe just moving on slightly from talking about the accents to talking about these characters. I mean, Scotty obviously is a wonderful character. On the other hand, he has negative attributes which appear to be connected to stereotypes about his Scottishness, his drinking problem.
Yes.
He's basically an alcoholic. And with O'Brien, again, I think you get a kind of... It's maybe not quite as pronounced as with Scotty, but there is a sense that, yes, O'Brien is allowed to have an Irish accent, but O'Brien he's not really an officer. He's not part of the kind of best and the brightest of Starfleet. He's kind of this kind of more earthy guy who mucks about with machines. He's a genius in his own sphere, but at the same time, he's kind of separated from the rest of it. It kind of reinforces that a bit. And I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen that Roddy Doyle Star Trek, that kind of online
cartoons,
thing, which is basically cartoons of O'Brien with a filthy mouth and as a complete alcoholic, and with a relationship with Keiko which is even worse than it was in real life, or in fictitious real life. But so I suppose it's interesting. I think O'Brien is a great character, but does he sometimes skirt a little bit close to elements of stereotype, or do you think it's fair enough that he is a believable Irishman, and that's not so much an issue as it maybe was with Scotty? What do you think?
Well, I think Miles O'Brien is closer to being a real Irish character, forgetting the fact that he, as a person, he's actually Irish, but he's playing an Irish character on a show. I think he does play it with a certain amount of gravitas, and the fact that he could relax and just speak in his normal accent, and he doesn't have to think about what the next inflection on his words is going to be. Is it going to be up or down, or whatever. So he's much more relaxed, and I find him believable in that sense, comfortable in his role. So the only thing I didn't like, there was one aspect of Miles O'Brien's character, not an aspect of it, sorry, something he had to do, which I really cringed at, and that was when he sang The Minstrel Boy.
Okay. Yeah. Because for many people, that's a kind of favourite moment. I think
it is. And you'd almost find somebody doing that at almost any day of the week in a pub in the west of Ireland. But on a starship, slightly out of context, I just thought, what the heck? And I don't know whether Colin Meaney's a good singer or not, but maybe he just wasn't a good singer. I mean, he did it with gusto, But,
I thought you were going to say him singing Jerusalem, which is maybe more surprising. It's kind of English anthem that he and Bashir are singing together.
William Blake.
And I kind of assume he's singing it for Bashir's benefit.
Yeah, but then I'm not too surprised,
quite into it.
Because the always think with O'Brien is that he very much embraces quite a bit of what you would class as English culture. The idea that they're reenacting the Battle of Britain. Yeah. That's something people in Scotland particularly follow interest in. It's more of that sort of, that
well, it's certainly not people in Ireland, because, they were neutral in the war, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't...
We had, according to the movie credits, we had 8 pilots in the RAF.
Oh, okay, fine, right, okay. Well, there you go. So O'Brien had to select a cadre to choose from.
And it just always seems that things like with Jerusalem, I remember watching that thing, and that's probably the unofficial anthem of England you would associate with the cricket, last night at the proms, and then there's O'Brien.
The Women's Institute.
Just swinging his arms away, singing it. It's like, it's a bit bizarre.
But is that an instance
Did anyone see the uncut scene from from Star Trek The Next Generation, where Data, the one that was the episode that was banned by the
United Ireland. I was going to mention that.
The scene that they didn't show was when Data said that was when the IRA were defeated, and in the background, Miles was going, "Yes."
Really? Surely not.
I tell you when I feel sorry for Cole Meany is there's a scene in, if you watch Up the Long Ladder, which maybe we can come talk about in a minute, the scene where because he's the transporter operator, he has to beam in all these Irish stereotypes with their pigs and their sheep and all these animals. And there's quite a good shot on him because it's an interesting moment to watch because obviously the scene calls for Miles O'Brien to be a bit disdainful and a bit shocked at these people. It's just a little moment in that shot where you kind of think you can see Colmini kind of ever so slightly rolling his eyes at this awful script and this awful episode that he's in, and like, what the hell have I let myself in for?
How dare you do this to my people?
Exactly. Because I suppose that's something just to step slightly into that area. I guess one of my issues with the presentation in the Fairhaven stories, also to some degree in Sub Rosa, is that the Irish characters or the Scottish characters, they do fall into a fairly narrow stereotype in a way that maybe Scotty or Miles O'Brien are more developed, they're more real characters. But certainly in Fairhaven, they play into this idea of drunkards and idiots and sort of simpletons, and do you know what I mean? The way the villagers act, they're very superstitious. They're all in the pub the whole time. They're drinking too much. There's the guy who's basically a scrounger and is constantly asking Tom Paris for money to go and get drunk, and even Michael Sullivan, who is a more positive presentation generally. As soon as Janeway dumps him, he sounds like he goes completely nuts. He's off the rails. He's this kind of emotional child, basically parading around. The whole holo fantasy disintegrates because he can't deal emotionally with something like that. And I think that is these are dangerous stereotypes in a way that are kind of being invoked to some degree. And again, in Sub Rosa, there's this, the superstitious, backward Scottish guy who actually is the only one who knows what's really going on, talking about ghosts and so on, and everyone else thinks he's this kind of idiot. Star Trek is not being massively sensitive around these kind of stereotypes in these episodes.
We talk about the British Isles here in England, Ireland and Scotland, but I think it's a problem they've had always with Europe. We have the French bar in Voyager Season 1, a lot of French characters. And I always think, if I was a German fan, and Star Trek has a big fan base in Germany, they have their convention there all the time. I mean, I had a dear friend that was, half German, and anytime Germany seems to be represented in films, whether it's Star Wars, it's evoking the Nazis, Star Trek, anytime you want to see a German on it, they are either an alien that is collaborating with the Germans, it is fascism, it's the German Nazis, and Star Trek evokes Nazis numerous times, where it's the Killing Game, Stormfront, of various episodes. It's like, and people are like, well, we're complaining about how our culture is represented. It's like this narrow culture of like Scotland of a time past, Ireland of a time past. The only way it seems modern sometimes of Ireland is, this idea of a united Ireland. So it's an Ireland perhaps of the future. Whereas in others, it's like, what's the Germans of the past? And for Star Trek to be the show that's like, well, let's get the Germans back in. Well, who are they this time? They're the Nazis. And not just that you've got a German con officer, it's a German that's working, in holodeck. It's the German that's the Nazi.
Do you not think that because the idea of an actor in Star Trek appearing as a Nazi, that they had to carry that forward almost as an homage? Like, so when Spock dressed up in a Nazi uniform in one episode, maybe they're just referring back to that as a...
I would say if it was...
He established the...
but if it was one-off, you could understand it. I was mostly with Ireland, Ireland, you can go, well, if Fairhaven's one episode, but then it's 2 episodes where the stereotypes continued, and then you've got up the long ladder. And with the Germans, it's like, well, they've done that once, and they do it again in Voyager, then they do it again in Enterprise, and it's like, there are other Germans, Germans are your fan base. We always talk about we need representation in Star Trek. Give that to the Europeans as well, you've got a French character, but he's basically...
But he's not French.
He's English. There's everything about Patrick Stewart's performance is English. It's not like
the Earl Grey tea.
You don't have him as a French captain embracing perhaps French culture with drinking some wine here and there. Yes. And then you've got the Germans, which are reduced to the Nazis. And it just seems to be this problem that, America, as you mentioned, it's a country based on immigrants. And then it's their portrayal of these people who are ancestors to a lot of people who are watching Star Trek in America and abroad, where it's like, oh, so I'm a Nazi, I'm a drunkard, I'm this Irish stereotype, I'm this English dandy. Where's the nuance? Where's the normal people?
I suppose there's that question, isn't there? I mean, whether those kind of identities are flattened to some degree, but also, I suppose there's an element of, loosely speaking, what we might call cultural appropriation. And, there are probably more serious issues of cultural appropriation in American culture and in Star Trek. I'm thinking of, say, Native American cultural appropriation. But there is an element of that when you look at these, say, creating a holodeck program set in this kind of twee Irish fantasy, or even creating a Disneyland Scottish planet. There is this kind of idea of taking this culture and sort of absorbing it for entertainment or for some kind of pleasure in it, without necessarily being aware of any kind of real question about the authenticity of it, or being real or honest to that somehow. And I don't want to. I feel like we're sort of bashing these episodes. I mean, to be honest, I think a lot of these episodes don't work. They probably wouldn't work anyway. They're just lousy episodes, broadly speaking. And they have positive points. They're not just bad because of the way that they present these things. And I'm sure there are other people, from other parts of the world who might feel the same way about representation in different contexts. And I guess we have to be realistic. We're Star Trek fans in England or in Ireland or in Scotland. And we're not the ones making this product. It is an American product. It always has been, and it always will be. But I think it's an interesting point you raised, say, about the German fans. I mean, Germany is the biggest export market for Star Trek in the world. And it's true that has never been taken on board within kind of canonical Star Trek output, I don't think. On the other hand, I sort of feel like it's tricky because, I'm a historian. I write a lot about the Second World War. It's not so strange for me to think of Germany in those terms, because those are the terms that I generally think of Germany. But I think I agree. It's something that they can make more effort in a way to do. I mean, it's interesting. The one place that we do see in Star Trek in the, in inverted commas, present is London. We do see in Star Trek Into Darkness, we see 23rd century London. And Lee pointed out before we started recording that it's interesting. You actually see the Union Jack flying in London.
Union flag,
Union
isn't it?
flag, yeah, apparently. Apparently, we're not allowed to call it the Union Jack unless we're on board ship. But we see the British flag basically flying in London, which is strange because, and I think it's alongside the United Federation of Planets flag. But that suggests that these kind of nations, these nation states, or whatever you want to call them, still exist alongside the kind of broader political entity.
That was the only reason you see that in Into Darkness, is because Brexit was successful.
You reckon?
I just thought I'd throw that in.
But Lee was pointing out that that Into Darkness was coming out around the time of the Scottish referendum, right? And that therefore it was making quite a big assumption that Scotland wasn't going to leave Britain, because obviously if Scotland left, we'd have to change our flag as well, because we'd have to remove the Scottish chunk of it. So that was kind of an interesting question as well. And I suppose there's always been with Star Trek this kind of lingering question of how do these existing nation states of Earth, we know that there's some kind of global, like some kind of Earth government. We know obviously there's a government beyond that. There's the Federation government. But what does it mean to be French, or what does it mean to be, whatever?
And I think when with this sort of, when you've seen that sort of, America, the Union flag represented on the screen, and it made me chuckle because the Scottish leader at the time, Alex Salmond, is a well-known Star Trek fan.
Yes.
And Star Trek Voyager is his favourite series, and after the vote to remain in the UK, he said that if it wasn't honoured, the UK government would face a wrath like that from the Wrath of Khan. And he was quoted, and the front page of the Scottish Sun was Alex Salmond quoting Star Trek, this Wrath of Khan. And it's this idea that, Star Trek culture is well known within the UK, that they could make that a front page headline and go, people will understand what that's meaning.
Well, it is the whole, Scottish independence referendum, the whole Brexit phenomenon as well is very much something that, I don't know if we've seen it much in Star Trek. There was a Star Trek novel that was quite interesting about a planet that wanted to secede from the Federation. So very much like we have with Brexit now, really, the kind of political ramifications of how does the Federation cope if someone wants to leave, basically. And in that novel, there was a historical context, which was that it was a TNG novel, Picard and Alexander. Alexander was a little boy at the time. Were learning about the War of Independence. So the context in that was America becoming independent from Britain, and basically Picard in that story was by going through that process, which again is very complicated because, you know, Picard is French, but at the same time he's English. So, you know, which side of this war is he really on? But, you know, notionally he's French. But anyway, by looking at this kind of historical parallel, it gave him more sympathy to this planet that wanted to secede, even though obviously the Federation don't really... That's not what... Yeah. We like the idea the Federation is growing, people want to join, not the idea that people want to leave. And I suppose the same is true with Europe. You know, with Europe, for many years, the debates have been around letting new countries in, sort of broadening the scope of that family. And now we've got this situation where, you know, we're leaving, other countries may be thinking about leaving, and that whole thing, you know, could be kind of disintegrating. And I know that's something that, in terms of future Star Trek and future Star Trek series, some people have pitched versions of Star Trek where the Federation is kind of collapsing, and you know, there is more of that kind of move to disintegrate it. It's kind of... So I suppose it sort of plays into all these things. And, you know, from the very beginning, we had this, you know, multicultural crew. We had this idea of these characters who were all, you know, from different parts of Earth at least, but they were all part of one kind of political unity in a sense that didn't exist at the time, and doesn't exist now to the extent that we see it in Star Trek.
I suppose we see a bit of that in Star Trek 6, the idea of like we're going to have to expand to bring in the Klingons, the old enemy, whether, you know, the Russian parallels. I suppose they've not really seen much representation in Star Trek either, would be the Russians, but the idea of Russian history, Russian has always been sort of infused in Star Trek in the beginning. You know, we've got Russian crew members, you know, but we don't see that as a history. We get a touch of a bit of them. Vodka was invented, you know, these sorts of things. But then Russians with the fall of the, you know, Chernobyl, all these different things in the communism. That's all run through Star Trek for so many years, but very little actual representation of what it's like to be a Russian, a normal person.
Well, and Worf as well. You know, Worf's parents being Russian is kind of interesting.
Of course,
you know, I don't know where Worf grew up exactly, but what impact did that have on his sense of who he was? You know, it's not just being Klingon; it's also being, you know, is there that kind of Russian cultural perspective? We don't. Yeah, exactly. We don't tend to think about that. And I think it's interesting. We tend to sort of assume that a lot of the Star Trek characters are, you know, so that someone like Geordi is a kind of African-American character, but actually I don't think he is. I'm pretty sure somewhere it's specified that Geordi was born in Mogadishu. You know, Uhura speaks Swahili. You know, she doesn't speak English as a first language. So it's this kind of, there's a level of homogenization in terms of the assumption of the audience, but actually often Star Trek is kind of being quite specific and saying these people are coming from all over Earth in this kind of future version of Earth. Of course, we don't see it because we see San Francisco, we see, you know, a random vineyard in France, we see London briefly, but that's about it. So we don't really get much sense. You know, we don't go to Ireland in Star Trek's time period. Sadly, we don't go to Scotland in Star Trek's time period.
In some of the novels,
right? So then we might,
not on screen.
I suppose maybe it's that globalization thing of like you're part of the Federation, you've got these different things, but where do people consider themselves from? Oh, I'm from Earth, but I live in France or something.
I like the idea of suggesting that, you know, I am from Earth, you know, idea, but cultural identity will probably sit with us for centuries to come. I don't know that it'll ever be ruled out.
No.
It's one of the scary parts, I mean, and one of the things possibly driving Brexit as we speak is that the loss of cultural identity. I know that in Ireland, when Ireland joined the European Union, I remember somebody saying to me, almost like a quip, they said, you don't realise it yet, but you just signed away your sovereignty. And at the time, I didn't understand what that meant. But over time, you kind of do because of all the, you know, the troubles with people wanting to control their own laws and future. But we're getting off topic here. But you know, it's almost like the law of unintended consequence. Gene Roddenberry created a ship full of people from different parts of the world. They all represent a unified front, but occasionally they harken back to where they came from, what they represent, you know, drinking vodka, drinking sake, drinking whiskey, if those drinks represent, you know, their backgrounds. But they do, they like to identify with where they are. Although Sulu said referring to San Francisco, that was where he was born.
Right,
So he didn't
yeah.
identify as being Japanese.
No,
He
that's
identified
interesting. As American,
Yeah,
yeah.
American.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could move on briefly just to think about Englishness as well,
Yeah, of
because
course.
I mean that's the other thing is that we have, and I don't think we have. I mean, we have representations of England in terms of like Sherlock Holmes, the world of Sherlock Holmes and so on. But we don't. But we also have these characters. We have Kyle in the original series. We have Bashir. We have Reed, and there's something quite. I mean, I would say there is also a sense of a stereotype of Englishness in Star Trek, because if you think of those three characters, they have a certain similarity between them. They're all a little bit kind of stiff, and they play into a certain kind of
And I suppose Sherlock
stereotype
Holmes
of
was written by
Sherlock
Arthur
Holmes,
Conan
of course,
Doyle.
yeah.
The birthplace of it is Scotland.
Of course, that's true, and that's an
bizarrely
interesting
near my
point. Yeah,
office
yeah,
is a
yeah.
Sherlock Holmes
Yeah.
statue.
Yeah.
The local pub is Arthur Conan Doyle. I spent my 30th in a pub called Moriarty. Everyone
Right.
associates Sherlock with it's a very English thing, English
Very
character,
London,
English
yeah.
gentleman, where it's like, well, this was written by a
after
Scot who then kind of moved.
After that round
Yeah,
of drinks,
yeah,
you
yeah.
went to see Dr. Watson the next
Yeah,
morning.
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
That was
yeah.
another story.
But it's interesting. I mean, thinking about say Bashir and Reed, and the way that their Englishness kind of plays into that. I think there's less kind of explicit discussion of it, I suppose, in some ways compared to maybe to other
Yeah.
characters, compared to say Scotty, who talks about being Scottish a lot. But at the same time, it does sort of. I think particularly if you think of like early seasons, Bashir is a bit of a twit. He's a bit kind of annoying. A lot of that kind of he's quite. There's an element of on Deep Space Nine. He's this kind of because there's that kind of conflict between him as the kind of slightly naive. I suppose it's what we talk about now as privilege.
Yeah.
Between him and Major Kira, for example,
Yeah, out
he's
here in
the
the
kind of
frontier,
from the
yeah.
wealthy old country in a sense, and he's on the frontier and so on. She has that line about what you're calling the frontier, that's my home. Sort of emphasising that he has this kind of naive outlook, which I suppose we might associate with a kind of English colonial attitude in some ways. I think that's sort of kind of ties into that. And of course we have with Bashir, we have the James Bond fantasy, which is very much kind of English, and again quite a sort of backwards English kind of fantasy. But I think with Reed, it really becomes... I can't, just to lay my cards on the table, Reed is by miles my least favourite character in the whole of Star Trek.
Yeah,
I
he's
can't
one of my
bear
least.
him.
Yeah, I'm not a fan.
I absolutely cannot stand him. But I think a certain amount of that is because he taps into this kind of stereotype of the sort of clipped, repressed Englishman, and he's all about his traditional family and his and they're I don't know, they've got some naval background and something. There's something about him that is to me a sort of. It is very much that kind of colonial English sort of. There's something.
Well, they did
quite
portray it when his
unpleasant
parents came on board. They were very stiff upper lipped or almost didn't want to wish him a happy birthday. There was one episode where
it was
they were
his
trying to find
birthday, and they were.
trying to find out what his favourite food was.
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Pineapple.
Yeah. And they video called the parents.
Yeah.
And then you get that. I think you get that kind of almost.
It's
hard
late
to-
at night. Why are you calling us this hour? We're at Deep Space.
I know, your son's on this dangerous mission.
I almost see it when you watch like the behind the scenes documentaries, and I almost think that it's worth the cost of the Blu-rays just for the documentaries alone. But then you get the actor who played Malcolm Tucker, who's talking about there's talk that they would make him a gay character, and it's like
Malcolm Tucker.
Yeah.
from from the thick of it.
Malcolm Reed. I only
That
say,
would be a good crossover.
I only say that like I got into London 3
Was
days
that
ago.
when the scene we didn't see where they got married?
I got into
in the chapel in Las Vegas.
I got into London 3 days ago, and within 5 minutes, I saw a man
There's
doing
all
an
these
Ichi in a
deleted-
Vietnamese restaurant.
Well,
so,
there you go. That's-
it's
There's
Hollywood
all these,
stars everywhere.
This is the
deleted scenes.
metropolitan
Yeah.
elite down here.
But in the Blu-ray, Malcolm Reed, not Tucker,
Dominic Keating.
Keating, he says a thing that we would make him a gay character. It's like absolutely not. That is not happening whatsoever. And just that very much that sort of there's that sort of traditional perhaps British English person that would say something like that, going, "Oh, and you're going to portray a gay character in this play, you have to kiss him." Oh no, I'm not doing that. That's absolutely not happening. And it just shows that sort of that kind of British person that we perhaps all know, where it's like, no, I'm not doing that.
So do you think that's interesting? So I agree. I find those interviews quite uncomfortable. But do you think that's a particularly English thing? That kind of level of internalized.
I think what is almost comes out of this sort of the Brexit thing, where we look at like. When we look at how it all kind of panned out, you see something like Scotland, where I think it was all yellow represented state. So that whole top to north. And then you've got London, all yellow as well. So these kind of cultural thing. And then you see a lot of the other areas, and then it's the types of views where you hear people about that inclusion when it goes to some sort of back town or something, or a location where it's like, what's your thoughts on Europe, people coming over, Romania joining, what's your views on changing culture? And it's like, I don't agree with that. And we get, there's that people like that in Scotland as well, but when you hear like a character that's very much based around being stiff upper lip, traditional, military service, and then you have the actor then kind of in that same mold where it's like, why would I make this character gay? That makes absolutely no sense, that the two can't homogenize, paints into that idea of, well, that's sort of some of the English people we've been seeing in the past few years, whether it's a Nigel Farage or someone like that. I'm not saying they represent England, but they perhaps represent that type of English character that we're seeing represented on screen, that stiff upper lip. No, we couldn't have this character portrayed this way. No, this is how I am, Union flags, all that sort of military
traditional sort of, yeah.
Absolutely.
No, that's true. That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Definitely, yeah. That kind of toxic Englishness, we might say.
Can we talk about the greatest living Irishman who served on a starship?
Oh yeah. Who's that?
O'Reilly.
Oh yeah, I was going to come back to him. Yeah,
Really?
I sort of. No. It's a good point. Although I have. Yeah, okay. He's up there with Reed probably on my list.
I've just got in my head. One more time.
That's right.
Yeah,
he really played it up, and
he did. Yeah.
Of all the people who were a stereotypical Irish actor or playing an Irish character, his was the one that was the most human. His was the one that I forgive the most,
really,
but because it was so funny. And fun.
It was funny. Yeah, but he was seriously annoying. But I wonder whether, just to be a bit more serious for a minute, I wonder whether the kind of elephant in the room in some of these conversations is around class, because really what we get with the English characters is they read as quite upper class characters, at least. Certainly Reed comes across as this quite sort of upper class character. Bashir, I would say, comes across as a kind of upper class character until we meet his parents, and then it's kind of interesting because we're learning about the extent to which Bashir is not who he said he was, and he's kind of been reinvented genetically. And certainly when you meet his father, you get this sense that there's some kind of there's a sort of socially aspirant element to that. Do you know what I mean? Like,
was he an architect or something?
I can't remember what he was. No, but I'm just thinking in terms of his accent and so on, and his whole sort of demeanour is very different. He's not the kind of stiff upper lip.
Yeah, it seems like he's trying to chase that next.
Exactly, and the father is always trying to. Yes, exactly. He's always got a new project on the go. He's always doing something new. He's like that kind of stereotype of the kind of trying to become more respectable or become more successful or become.
I think it's one of these things.
Whereas Bashir's kind of managed it.
They always say class is a British invention, and America never had. America's not a class thing, whereas it's something that's very much changed now. But Britain, if you associate with it, be like, oh, you've got the upper class. You hear people when you go there. It's bizarre seeing more. We're a stone's throw away from Buckingham Palace here, and you've got the odd bit of shop that advertise it. Whereas you go to America and you walk down the street, and next to Time magazine is this celebrity thing telling you all about what's happening with the culture there. What's the Queen doing? Who's marrying who, princes and that. And it seems to romanticize there in America this class structure, whereas here. Less so.
Here we see it as a toxic kind of thing.
And in America now, class is becoming a more predominant thing. Working class, middle class. This is being squeezed out. Working class being associated with certain type of voters. All these sort of things. So it seems very much a change in kind of how it's viewed, I think.
But I think maybe the difference also is that in America. So yes, you might have a kind of working class identity that would be a positive thing, but at the same time. There's more of a tendency to group everyone into the middle class as much as possible somehow, and also there's an idea that it's definitely good to be moving in that direction. Do you know what I mean? Whereas here, I think there might be more. It's more complicated, I suppose, because traditionally we don't like the upper classes very much. There's a kind of there's more sympathy towards the other kind of end of the scale. I don't know whether I'm just thinking, say, Bashir, it's things like the fact that he's got a teddy bear. It's that kind of element of the upper classes, slightly infantilized, slightly kind of. You wouldn't see any of the American characters in Star Trek valuing their teddy bear in that way, in that kind of childish. Whereas there is something that's seen as a bit, the kid who's looked after by their nanny and sent off to boarding school and all that sort of thing. There's a whole sort of repertoire of stereotypes again, sort of in the background there that that kind of feed in one way or another into that kind of characterisation. On the other hand, we have Bashir and O'Brien. It's a great sort of Anglo-Irish friendship, and the fact that they can sing Jerusalem together, or who knows what else they get on to together.
Singing the Black and Tans and the night and stuff.
And this, of course, this was in the 90s as well. When I guess the peace process was going on and so on. Actually, that was quite a nice. You could see that as quite a positive step. That they started off in this very antagonistic relationship, the Irishman and the Englishman, who didn't get on at all, and then they end up being, the best friends that we have in Star Trek, really.
Yeah, it's very deep. I mean, to the general public, there is a perceived animosity between Irish people and English people, but on a personal level, it doesn't exist. We all get along. I obviously, as an Irish person, live in England and have lived for a great deal of time. And I've gone back to Ireland and met people from Yorkshire in the west of Ireland running bars. So there is a crossover. In fact, I think even during the 90s, there was an economic boom in Ireland, and a lot of the workers, or people going there for jobs, were going there not because they could get a job, but because the pay scale was better.
It's a role reversal of what it was previously. That you could see England from Ireland, and it was always like over there is the best.
Is an opportunity.
And then obviously with Scotland as well. That we talk about Ireland went over to America. Well, Ireland came over a lot to Scotland, the west coast as well. So very much like everyone's always been kind of moving along. In Scotland there was issues, but people would move south. It's Train Spotting, one of the famous movies that describes Scottish culture. When the character wants to escape the despair of Scotland, he goes to London to take part in that economic boom. The property market and everything like that. And then when he returns, things go to hell, really, and stuff like that. So it's always been that thing that England sometimes is what pulls us all to down.
It's interesting when you're saying that about people getting on, socially or whatever. I mean, I was in Ireland over Christmas, and several people said to me when I came back, did you get any hostility over Brexit? Which kind of took me by surprise, because what I did notice was there were a lot of people quite anxious about Brexit in Ireland because of the impact that it might have on Ireland. But I certainly never thought. I mean, maybe they just, assumed rightly that I didn't vote for it. But at the same time, there wasn't any kind of that. I didn't feel any of that directed at me. Do you know what I mean? I felt it was it was an issue that was in the air. But so I suppose, but these things are interesting. It is possible to be in a situation where there's kind of political tension, but not necessarily on a. Those relationships can still be positive on a one-to-one level or on a kind of interpersonal level, and certainly Star Trek exemplifies that, I guess.
You'd really need to have a degree in philosophy to be able to discuss why people think Brexit would affect them in Ireland. I personally can't understand this. If a country wants to stand up and say we wish to be independent of all these various rules and regulations.
Well, it's to do with borders and hard borders and soft borders and all these sorts.
Why people in another country would find that objectionable? They've got challenges in their own country that need sorting out. Don't be looking to another country to figure out what those guys are doing. That's kind of.
So then, is that, are we not hypocrites of that? That I was mentioning off the air here that I was in America a few months ago, and everyone's always quick to say, Scottish grandparents, Scottish relatives, and all that sort of stuff. And so, what do you guys make of Trump over there? And we come out and it's like, well, we think this, and this. We find maybe this abhorrent, all these sorts of things. But then you almost before, where it'd be like, say, during the Bush times, for example, there's a lot of sneering at America. There's guys and cowboys and idiot. Here we are, all buddied up with them. We're clearly above this sort of thing. Whereas now that sort of the idea that we can sneer at other nations and how they conduct themselves. Like, well, I say that, but at the end of the time, we're having a bit of a bad time as well with Brexit. So just ignore me and stuff like that. The idea that
we've lost our moral high ground.
So that's what I'm saying. That's why I say you really need a degree in philosophy to be able to understand why we feel it's okay to say those guys over there, what a bunch of idiots. We're okay. Not realising that those guys over there looking at us and saying, what a bunch of idiots, we're okay. And so it goes round in a circle. But as to what generates it and where it becomes, goodness only knows. and it's very difficult to discuss, and especially on a short podcast like we're doing right now,
which is meant to be about Star Trek, and not about Brexit.
I'd
and
like to
Trump
ask a
and stuff.
question,
but
and maybe just change subject.
Yeah.
But I'm imagining Captain Picard, or rather Patrick Stewart, how he would have played the role if he had chosen to speak in a French accent, didn't drink Earl Grey tea, but maybe had coffee, had a baguette for lunch, all the stereotypes coming out here, popped the cork of a champagne bottle now and again, or had a quiet Bordeaux.
Which must have been, in some ways, I mean, it's going a bit far to say that was what was in their mind when they created the character, but the fact is they did create a French character, and they weren't sure that they wanted an English actor to play him. It's interesting, I've just been listening to the audiobook on Audible of the new Dayton Ward Discovery novel, which I'm enjoying the novel, it's great, but the guy who narrates it appears to be under the impression that Captain Giorgio has a French accent, which I guess he's deduced from her surname. So all of
isn't French.
No, exactly. Well, I don't know. It sounds sort of
Romanian, Greek.
Is it? Well, anyway, maybe it's my tin ear, but it certainly doesn't sound like Michelle Yeoh. To me, it sounds like a French accent that the guy's doing. But so I suppose there is that sort of question about what kind of accent do you put on these things, and obviously Patrick Stewart clearly took the view, I'm just going to play this as Patrick Stewart. Do you know what I mean? And I'm going to do this as if... And like we said with the Earl Grey tea, they sort of played into that, and the kind of... think of his fantasy in Generations. It's a kind of Victorian English family Christmas. There's really nothing kind of culturally French about Picard apart from the wine and, when he goes back home. But then even the rest of his family are all English as well. So it's this weird sort of...
Maybe that's where that globalisation will come from, where we talk about these characters. Yeah. We think they're American, but actually they're from here. Maybe they're just all from that kind of planet. And everything becomes... you see it now, like more, especially in the 90s, British culture, with the infusion of cable television, American culture is being beamed into everyone's house, the internet has made everything feel so much smaller. I mean, I work in mental health, and I work with some individuals that have got, are very housebound, and what they find interesting is they'll watch videos of like people playing games or watching something like My Little Pony, reacting to it, these usual reaction videos. I remember turning up at someone's house that one day to do some work with them, and then this American accent. Where in America are you from? Oh, I'm from here in Edinburgh. But the infusion of all that culture coming in had physically changed someone who had never left Edinburgh into this American-style accent from what they were watching. And he's not the only one that I've encountered that's like that. And maybe this idea, keep adding 100-odd years onto it. You can transport to America in a day. I've come here down to London, 4 hours on the train, hour on the flight. If I could come here every weekend, how would my accent continue to evolve? And if I could go to New Zealand, America all the time, as if I'm going to my local shop, how would I continue to evolve as a person? Would I consider myself Scottish, or would I consider myself someone that lives in Scotland, but I work, in Chicago Monday to Friday, transport back, and then on the weekend I go for a night out in Japan before coming back, and it all just amalgamates.
That's an interesting point. And therefore, what is your kind of cultural heritage, and what does it mean? Because then maybe everyone becomes, what we see in America, the idea of, okay, so I live in Boston, I have all my life, and I've never been to Ireland, but I essentially feel I'm Irish, even though, do you know what I mean? Even though, like, from a European perspective, that maybe seems strange. Yeah. But then maybe it's true if once we have transporters and everyone can travel around the world at will, maybe that becomes more important in terms of working out who you are, that this sort of cultural background becomes significant, so, whether that's Captain Janeway having these kind of Irish roots, or or Captain Picard, it doesn't seem French, having a bottle of French wine on the shelf, or whatever that is.
Or anything. Didn't even celebrate Bastille Day. I mean, come on.
Well, they don't celebrate Christmas, so well, I suppose they did. Kind of that flashback.
Come on. My big question, though, just to kind of bring things probably towards a close, is where are the Welsh people in Star Trek?
Yeah,
where's the extra seat? We've got an empty seat at this table. What's going on there? And is that because because there wasn't the same degree of Welsh migration to the States?
But it's maybe one of those things. It's when we think of, say, Scotland and Ireland, for example. What is that? What do we show out to the world?
Yeah,
Ireland, Guinness. the amount of money that goes into sort of the, like St. Patrick's Day. You've got holidays that are almost globalized. You go to America,
That's true,
you've got the parades. You go to America, which is bizarre because, you have a police officer that dies here, normal funeral. You have someone that dies on sort of the East Coast. You've got the bagpipes, everyone's marching on down. Like, we've sent our culture around to the other parts of the world and monopolized on it. Come to Scotland, this is where you want. Ireland, people project this image of Guinness, come home, it's a financial thing. England as well, we talk about books and literature, Harry Potter. It's a Scottish thing, but it's almost associated with come to England, the home of Harry Potter. All these things, people will come there. But Wales perhaps doesn't have that thing where they can monopolise that this is our culture and what we can perhaps globalise, come here, this is our incentive, or this is the part of our culture that's now infused in America. And, whether it's the bagpipes at a funeral, whether it's St. Patrick's Day on the East Coast, all these different things. And I think maybe that's something that's missing from Wales than
they're never quite exported in the same way.
No,
I don't think
that's not true because Swansea, Cardiff, was the greatest exporter of tin and copper.
Sure, I don't mean literally. I mean they've never exported culturally in the same way as maybe Scotland and Ireland and England. Have in some way. They're more. Yeah. And what I guess in England maybe I don't know. In terms of science fiction, Cardiff obviously is where Doctor Who comes from, and you do get a bit of Welsh representation in Doctor Who as a result, because every now and then they do an episode set in Cardiff. But I mean, you definitely don't get the same extent of kind of even though there is Welsh nationalism. I mean, if you look politically, there are Welsh nationalist politics in the same way as there are Scottish nationalist politics, or Ireland obviously more complicated, but I mean, and England, English nationalist politics. But it's interesting. I wonder why that doesn't translate, and I wonder whether in America does the concept of Welshness even really exist in the same way as the concept of Irishness? But
sometimes I think people don't do it. You'll get it where it's like, Scotland, they associate as just it's part of England. Everything's part of England. Oh, you're from England, are you? Well, no, I'm part of Scotland. We're part of the United Kingdom. Yeah. You think a country that is based around states would get the idea that, you're from Scotland, but you're part of, that. I think sometimes there's that confusion in America about what actually is these people. Are we a United Kingdom, or are we just,
Well, and maybe these quite cartoonish stereotypes help to differentiate in some ways, because, I mean, the Scotland of Sub Rosa is kind of quite distinct, at least. The island of Fairhaven is quite distinct. It's quite kind of easy to get to grips with. Whereas maybe in the real world, like you say, you're at home in Scotland, and then you hop on a flight and you're down in London, and you're back and forth and you're doing all this sort of thing. Life is a bit more intermingled, a bit more complicated. Well, maybe that's a good point for us to wrap things up today.
We've proved that here. We all are again.
I think before we all have you got ending words? I was thinking of Gorkon saying, I think we've all got a long, long way to go.
Oh, I don't know about that. Well, I was thinking we should all, have a rendition of Jerusalem, really. Before we go off to sing Jerusalem together. Lee, why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you on the internet?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Lee_Nostromo. You can find me on my own podcast, Filibuster, where it's talking about movie and geek culture, interviews with people involved in literature, film, and behind the scenes, and looking at different film festivals around the UK.
And Tony, what about you?
Right, well...
That's a deep breath. That sounds like there's going to be a lot of plugs coming.
No, exclusively on Trek FM. You'll find me hosting Continuing Mission, where we discuss what fans are doing to keep Star Trek alive by making fan-made movies. And Twitter, Shamrock165. There you go. How Irish is that? And, so there you are.
Duncan's English Rose.
There you go. Yeah, English Rose 26. No, and you can find me on Twitter at Barrett's Books if you see no nationalism. Well, it's been great fun, both of you. Thank you both for joining me. And to our listeners, Englishness, Irishness, Scottishness in Star Trek is not the only thing we've been talking about this week. So here's a listen to what else you might have missed on the Trek FM network.
Previously on Trek.fm, Literary Treks.
But let's start with that first one, that Siege in Super Space. So, oh boy. Super Space, I don't know, is this better than Subspace? Is it...
Well,
I think it is. The thing I really love about this issue is we haven't had many stories at all about super space.
The Edge, a Star Trek Discovery podcast.
Right, so okay, they're under orders. They're not supposed to talk about it, and that's how you maintain the continuity that Kirk and Spock are surprised that there's a mirror universe. I mean, that works. That makes sense. But these people were there. They know that there's doppelgangers there because they know that because Cadet Tilly became Captain Killy. Right? They know this.
To the journey.
There was a lot of face melting in this episode. You're right.
Everyone's melting. What a world! What a world! It was, and everybody was slimy looking. Why were they so sweaty? Why?
7 of 9 had this full-on Borg Queen look about her.
She did, and who else was really sweaty looking? Besides 7.
Neelix was really sweaty looking. I thought.
He was.
And he had kind of a silver tone. He had the silver
He
blood
did.
coming
Like,
through.
he was distinguished. Distinguished melting Neelix.
Yes. Yeah, he got a buff and polish.
The 602 Club.
No, I mean, it was really all we had was like animated shows. Like you had like the animated Batman series, the animated Superman series, and as far as the big screen went, it was not so great. I mean, you had Blade. Blade was... Some people cite Blade as kind of the precursor for the superhero genre picking back up, but it was very much kind of a genre film. I know technically it is a comic book film. I don't know if I'd count it in the realm of like big budget superhero movies.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
Check out all these shows and join the conversation about your favourite corner of the Star Trek universe and beyond. You'll find us wherever you get your podcasts.
If you're an Apple user, be sure to hit the subscribe button in Apple Podcasts on iPhone, iPad or Apple TV, or the desktop iTunes app to get the latest episodes as soon as they are published. And please leave us a star rating and a written review.
If you're not an Apple user, we've got you covered as well. You can find our shows on Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, Windows Phone, in most third-party apps, and you can stream and download the MP3 file from our website or grab the RSS link.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show, and there are many ways for you to do that. The best place to join in the larger conversation is the Babel Conference, our listeners group on Facebook. Just type Babel, that's Babel, into the search field on Facebook and it should come right up.
If you'd like to send us an email, you can use the form on our website at trek.fm/contact. Choose to send to a show and select Primitive Culture. That'll come right to us. You can also find the network on Twitter at TrekFM and on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. You can also find all three hosts of Primitive Culture on Twitter. Myself, Duncan Barrett, at Barrett's Books, Clara Cook on at Clara Jean MC, and our co-host Tony Black on at AJ Black Writer.
If you'd like to help us keep all our shows coming to you each week, you can become a patron of the network on Patreon. Visit patreon.com/TrekFM. That's patreon.com/TrekFM to get all the details. Perks include early access to episodes, exclusive content, producer credits, and more. Available through our special patrons website, Patron Zone. It requires a great deal of money to produce, host, and distribute these shows each month. We really appreciate any support you can give us and hope you'll join the team. Again, you'll find all the details at patreon.com/TrekFM.
So thanks everyone for listening to this episode of Primitive Culture. We'll be back soon to discuss more history, culture, and how Star Trek relates to it.
You're blended, all right.